All right. I'm going to start talking, folks, if I can have everybody's attention now. We still have more people joining in. This is wonderful. First time after the pandemic, I think we've run out of chairs for our in-person. A lot of folks joining us also online, so welcome to everyone. We've been holding these events in our hybrid format. Warm welcome to our first event this semester for our social justice program. My name is Sangha Niyogi. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And our social justice program has been going strong since 2018 now. I co-direct the program with my brother, Dr. Albert Ponce here. Oh, Albert gets clapped. In our social justice work, it is truly amazing to have a comrade with you, right? And this is what keeps us going. This is what sustains the work. So I'm very grateful for Albert always being there. I teach sociology. Albert teaches political science, right? And so right from the beginning, as we conceptualized our social justice program at DVC, we wanted it to be interdisciplinary, to break down the disciplinary boundaries in many ways. And we started off thinking of how important community engagement would be to our program. So it's at the heart of our program. We have a community advisory board with partner organizations from our local community who advise us on everything, including the assignments we want to give to our students. I think it is these community organizations, folks doing the work on the ground, and our students. Welcome everyone, keep joining us. Maybe we have some seats left. Our students and our community organizations that keep us grounded, right? Keep us accountable, okay? Because otherwise, sometimes professors and academics, we do our work up there in the ivory tower. We don't know if we are connecting. So you are the folks who keep us accountable. As I mentioned, our program is very interdisciplinary. We have an introduction to social justice course that is team taught by faculty from sociology, political science, history, and we have other core courses in our program, such as health justice, right? We've recently collaborated and included disability justice in our program. In the fall, we will be starting our introduction to LGBTQ studies, thanks to the efforts of Professors James Wilson and Patrick Moe. So we keep building, we've been building throughout the pandemic as well. We just keep the work going, thanks to the support of our DVC community. Thank you again for giving me just a few minutes at the beginning. I know you're not here to hear from me today, but I just want a few minutes of your time at the beginning just to share my perspective on what this work means to me. Standing for social justice means that we stand with those who have no power, especially in moments of duress, not just when it is convenient or popular. We recognize our common humanity and demand safety and dignity for all people. We acknowledge that the Israeli state's Zionist policies do not represent all Jewish voices or their relationship to their faith. Likewise, Hamas does not represent all Palestinians. Over the last several years, the Jewish and Muslim communities around the globe and here in the US, in California, on our campuses, have been facing major spikes in hate crimes and experienced increased hate. We here at DVC proudly affirm that we have zero tolerance for anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hate. And I want to reiterate this, especially for our students. We claim that DVC is a safe space for you. You are here to learn, and we will tolerate no nonsense or hurdles that stand in your way. You're here to learn and grow. So, as a community, as we said, we keep each other accountable. Please come forward to a trusted staff member or faculty member and say that this happened, right? Maybe you witnessed it, maybe you experienced it. We have a reporting mechanism. Sometimes often that reporting mechanism is lacking. We really need to work on it. But it's not going to improve if we stay quiet, right? So we can't be silent about this. Please come forth. And as faculty and staff, it is our job to advocate for you always. This can be happening in our classrooms. It can be happening in our student centers. So again, we are not going to tolerate the discrimination and hate that is happening already. We stand in solidarity with our students and colleagues and their families and loved ones who are directly or indirectly impacted by the ongoing trauma and violence. We join calls demanding the US, the EU, the world community really, to take immediate action, urgent action to stop this collective punishment, this horror and violence and genocide. Neutrality isn't a catalyst for mediation or change. It is the exact opposite. It's a trap to maintain the power imbalance exactly as it was, leaving the scales tipped in favor of those with power. We cannot allow our compassion to freeze due to fear or anger or fatigue. The overwhelming emotions we are experiencing are a small fraction of the horrors being encountered by folks in Gaza. We must find the strength to keep building solidarity and resist oppression. So I am beyond grateful to our DVC community for supporting this event and keeping the momentum. I want to now turn it over to my brother, Dr. Ponce, to introduce our speaker and say a few words to us.
Welcome, everyone. And I'm very grateful to Dr. Niyogi, my comrade, welcomed me since I arrived here in the fall of 2016. I arrived here to Diablo Valley College with a commitment to commit myself to this work. And I'm very grateful to see a lot of former students, comrades, just in this space. It's a packed room, got people in the back. It's awesome to kick off our social justice speaker series. And a comrade who's sitting here from my former institution, Lake Tahoe Community College. It's great to see you. Great to see you here, Lisa. And so this is 5 years, as Dr. Niyogi mentioned, that we've been hosting the social justice speaker series. 5 years, that's impressive. Not because we're running it, you're all sustaining it. We're getting support from this institution. And I'm particularly proud that we're hosting this series at a community college here in the Bay Area, where these rooms, these forums were once held just specifically at our elite, prestigious, quote unquote, institutions, Berkeley or Stanford across the way, or Sac State, or San Francisco State. But we're doing it here to provide these educational opportunities for us all to come together and to really open up to each other, and to learn, and to be transformed, and to take part in the world. Because as Dr. Niyogi mentioned, there is no time for neutrality. We have but one life, and that one life that we have, we want to commit ourselves to a better life for everyone. That's the commitment and the drive that we have behind our social justice program. And we personally, and I know most folks in this room, and you're all coming into that space. But one thing that I just, kind of warn against, it's not a warning in a bad way, it's a warning to halt us to stop, to reflect, and know that we have to unlearn a lot of things that we were taught in our K through 12 education system in the United States. Because there's a particular form of socialization which already puts ourselves on the side of the powerful, and we're taught to forget those who have no voice, who are being decimated, not only in the United States, but the world over. And today, as I was mentioning in my students in my theory class earlier, This is not the only crisis, humanitarian crisis on the planet as we speak, but we're paying attention to it today. Because as of now, there have been over 28,000 Palestinians killed. There have been 1,139 Israelis killed. So we see the disproportionality and the use of force and violence and the decimation of humans who have been disposed of in our imaginary as being dehumanized already. And those of you who have studied the way that racialization and dehumanization works, that's a precursor to their annihilation. So we have to pause, warn against that, and stop and say, no, we stand with those who are being targeted, and we're going to do something about it. We also have to undo a lot of myths. Our presenter today is an expert on this field, is doing work in this field, committed to the human rights. But there are myths that we must undo. As teaching politics, we're taught that there is but one democracy in the Middle East, and that is Israel. Not true. That's a myth. A myth is something that is untrue, but it is enduring in our imaginary. We believe it to be true. Not true. It is more alike when we think of South Africa, a separation by race, by class, and the way that white supremacy institutions of power operated in South Africa, supported by the United States, where we were able to use power to call maybe heroes to some, like Nelson Mandela, a terrorist. Not so. We know what Nelson Mandela was fighting for, but the US State Department claimed him a terrorist for wanting Black freedom. And this is why today we see South Africa leading the charge, charging Israel with genocide in the International Court of Justice. Because South Africa knows that move for justice requires struggle, not only in the streets, not only at armed, but in the courtroom. And the world is behind the Palestinians who are being decimated right now. Over 12,000 children. I have a child. I can't even imagine losing a child. We've lost over 12,000 children just by chance because of where they were born. And you all can say, I won the lottery because we're here in the Bay Area. And that's how being born into this world is. You win the lottery by chance. Feudal system, according to Joseph Cairns, a political theorist, is the way that humans come into existence. Just by chance, in this particular place, in this particular time. You were born here, you were born there, you're probably going to die before you grow old enough to enter kindergarten. And here, you may flourish and just, or you may not. But that's all I have to say, because I'll keep going. And I just want to introduce our speaker to kind of frame our discussion and frame that mindset of unlearning before we learn, and give a very, very warm welcome to our speaker, who Nadya Tannous is a passionate community organizer, born and raised here in the Bay Area, Ohlone Territory. We'll get into the theft of land and the land that we occupy in this space, with a focus on political education, movement relationship building, and returning land to the people, which is the topic of our discussion today. And people returning to the land. It is always a question about the land. Nadya currently serves as Director of Operations for Honor the Earth. She holds a Master of Science in Forced Migration and Refugee Studies from the University of Oxford, and a BA in Anthropology and Sociology from UC Santa Cruz. She's an organizer and a member with the Palestinian Youth Movement. So let's all give a very warm, gracious welcome to Nadya.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ponce and Dr. Niagli, for having me. Good morning, y'all. It's really, really nice to see your faces and to see that so many folks are interested in this topic. I'm gonna apologize to you working on tech that I didn't give you enough time to set up the slides, but we're gonna roll with it. Okay. Okay. Out of the side? Okay, thank you. Let me see if we can do it that way. Hey, perfect. Let me see. Oops. Did that work? Oh my God, amazing. Oh, trying to connect. I'm gonna connect to my hotspot. Let me see if that will help. Okay. Listen, I'm an organizer first and foremost, so we always know that we have to be on our feet, right? I don't need the slides, and neither do you to understand what's going on. But they're here, and I prepared them because they're really critical, right? Honoring the different ways that we learn. My name is Nadya Tannous. I'm born and raised here in the Bay Area. I'm a first-generation Palestinian. My parents came here to the so-called United States. My mother actually came here in the 60s, and my father came here in the 70s. They met in 1982 in San Francisco, Berkeley, California. And that's how I came to be. So I'm the first generation. I was raised by Nakba survivors. I was raised by my grandparents who survived the Nakba. We're from the villages of Yafa and Lid, which is on the coast of Palestine. 1/3 of the people in the Gaza Strip today are from my region. So talking about chance, being born somewhere, raised somewhere, if my grandparents had been 10 minutes late running from their homes, if they had been 10 minutes early, I could be born in the Gaza Strip. It's not lost on me. And what I want to say is, in terms of what we're seeing right now in Rafah, right, in Gaza, this is part of a continuation and a pattern that we, the Palestinian people, have experienced throughout our history. This is not the first time we've experienced genocide. My grandparents specifically survived the genocide of Yafa and the genocide of Lid. Lid was the last stand. The state of Israel was established in May of 1948, and Lid resisted until September of 1949. So I grew up with elders who were here in the Bay Area who all had one eye, like this. I used to think it was genetic. I would ask my dad, why are we like that? He would say, that's how you know that somebody's from a Lid. I thought it was a joke. It's because the people of Lid, we hid in the cacti. And with their good eye, they would shoot at the Israeli settlers, and the Israeli settlers who were armed with Britain weapons would shoot back. You know those little tiny thorns? They would pierce their eye. That's why my elders, so I grew up, they had one eye, because it was a badge that they had fought back. Al-Ajami ghetto, right? We grew up, we know the United States, most of us as our context. We know what the hood is, correct? The hood is not just an American experience or an American creation. The hood exists everywhere. So my family is from the 48 territories inside of so-called Israel. We are the Palestinian or the Arab citizens of Israel. When my grandfather and grandmother specifically were forced out, there was 3% of our village that was left behind. Those 3% were put into the Ajami ghetto. Y'all have heard about Tel Aviv, right? Tel Aviv has 31 districts. There is only one district that is allowed to be mixed. There's only one district where Palestinians are allowed to live as residents, and that is Ajami. Ajami is the ghetto of Tel Aviv. Ajami and Lid were the drug capitals of the Middle East in the 1990s. You know why? Because as crack and cocaine were coming through the Oakland port, that same type of capitulation, right, to lock Palestinian people up for gangs and drugs rather than for resistance, hit the Middle East, and it came through the port of Yafa. Those are my people, and that is the history that I stand on today. I want to say that to you and start that way as an introduction so you know who I am, but also because many of the things in Palestine, when we talk about Palestine, one of the myths is that we need to know 100% what the history is in order to have opinion about what's going on. What I'm saying to y'all is that you have your life experience, you know what's going on. You don't need the history from the 1700s to know what's wrong and right? When you see drugs coming into a community so that Palestinians become dealers for Israelis, so we get locked up for gangs and violence rather than for resistance and national liberation, you know what's going on because we're here, right? You know the history of the Black Panthers, you know the history of the American Indian movement, and you know the history of the Chicano movement. We have that. It rhymes, right? You stop fighting for freedom, and you have to stop fighting against prisons, right? Incarceration. These are the layers that the state creates in order to lock us up and to detain our freedom dreams. But we're here. And so what I'm gonna start with, once these slides get up and running, is a little bit of the history, because even though y'all don't need to know it step by step, it's a life journey, and I wanna set y'all up with the right building blocks. Does that sound good? Cool, let's get it going. So, I wanna make sure, should I just log on to here? Does that sound about right? Okay, let me try and do that. Just college Wi-Fi. Oops. Okay, accept and continue. All right, here we go. So, let me see if this will connect. Okay, accept and continue. This is the legacy one. Oh no, this is the regular. Come on, please. How many of y'all is this the first time that you've been at a talk about Palestine or about Palestine? It's nice to see you. How many of y'all know a decent amount about Palestine? When I say Nakba, you know what I'm talking about. Okay. How many of y'all are Palestinian? Hey, hey. Salam. Nice to see you. Let's see. Yeah, we can try refreshing on it. Thank you. Perfect. Yes, slideshow. Thank you. All right, y'all. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk about liberation and return Palestine in today's terms. By the end of this presentation, you'll know why I chose those words. So I'm going to start with the geography of Palestine. Easy. Where are we? Palestine is the elbow of the African continent. We are on the African continent. We are the land bridge between Asia, Europe, and Africa. So Palestine has been part of global trade connection for thousands and thousands of years. We have only had 75 years of political and geographic isolation, right? We've been isolated for 75 years, but we have thousands of years of connection. The pharaohs have a whole written manuscript about their beef with us from 900 BC, right? We've been around, and they called us Palesta or Palestia. I'm going to start that way because there's a myth that Palestine never existed. We don't exist as a people, and the word Palestinian didn't exist. There's enough Egyptologists in Europe to know that that's a lie, correct? So what we know also is that Palestine is the birthplace of Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. That's important because there's another myth. Palestine, the conflict between Israel and Palestine, is not a conflict, and it's not based on religion. We have thousands and thousands of years of Palestinians living together across religions. I'm Christian, right? In our culture, I'm not even supposed to ask you what your religion is, because our primary identity is who we are. The second is the family we come from. My religion is like fourth on the list. When Spain went into Europe, when Spain, the Europeans went into Spain, right, and kicked out the Moors, specifically around the Inquisition, right, Christian supremacy, and they kicked out Muslims and Jews, many of those Jews went to Palestine because Europe has a problem historically and presently with anti-Semitism. When they talk about rhetoric of anti-Semitism, that is not a crime that we as Palestinians have historically committed. That's a European problem. And Zionism, the political movement that Israel underpins itself by, that is also a European political movement, okay? So when we talk about Europe, Y'all know this. We're in Asia Minor. That's what they call us, right? This is Palestine. This is who we are as a people. This is Gaza. This is Jaffa, right? This is the Sahel or the coast. 2/3 of the people in Gaza, 1/3 are from this region. The other third are from the surrounding area. And the last third are from here. Because during Plan Dalet and the Nakba, people were pushed south. I'm going to show y'all quickly what I'm talking about. So here, the Israeli military, who were little bands of Jewish militants from Europe armed with British weapons, decided that they wanted maximum Jews on maximum land. So what does that mean for Palestinians? They want minimum Palestinians on minimum land. How are they going to do that? That's through the Plan Dalet policy. So when people come in, when the Israelis came in, their plan was to push us off of the land by any means necessary. That's why there was a cap on 3 sides. In my village, they pushed us south into Gaza and into the West Bank. They did the same in order to develop and to get to a place where this was possible. So what I'm telling you, just like we see the genocide today in Gaza, it's not random. There are military policies and procedures that were put in place in order to arrive us into this moment, right? Okay. Israel's founding and ideology. This is the first thing I want to get into. In 1880, actually, you have the first World Zionist Organization conference in Switzerland, okay? Jewish people from around Europe, particularly Jewish elites, came together and said, listen, we are experiencing hundreds of years of European anti-Semitism, pogroms, persecution, right? All the things that we know led up to the Holocaust. What are we going to do about that? There were many, many ideas. How do we deal with anti-Semitism in Europe? One of the ideas came from Theodor Herzl, that's him, who was a Hungarian Jew. His idea was inspired by someone named Cecil Rhodes. Do you all know who that is? Cecil Rhodes is the founder of Rhodesia. What's Rhodesia called today? Zimbabwe, right? Zimbabwe. So when Dr. Ponce was talking about South African apartheid, we also have Zimbabwean apartheid under Rhodesia. So they didn't look around to other liberation movements, people struggling for their liberation, and said, hey, we want to be like that. They're European, right? They're Jewish, but they saw themselves as white and therefore superior. The world is theirs to conquer. So they looked around and they wrote, Theodor Herzl wrote to Cecil Rhodes, and he said, we really like what y'all are doing in Africa. We think that's really cool. You took a piece of land, you took people from Europe, and you replaced the Black people of Zimbabwe with white folks. We want to do something like that, but we want to do it in a place in Asia Minor called Palestine. Will you help us? So his idea was really to propose a nation state. And because Europe was anti-Semitic, there was mass support. Leadership in Europe said, this is a great idea. We don't want Jews in Europe. Why don't we help them get a nation state in order to put them somewhere else? Are y'all following me? So they had to figure out, where are we going to put this state? The state of Israel was not the only location. One was Uganda, one was Argentina, one was the south of Utah. They had 8 different locations. What does that mean, y'all? It means that Israel wasn't chosen because of a religious connection. Theodor Herzl and the early Zionist movement was secular. Why did they choose Palestine? Because it was strategic to do so. When I say settler colonialism, I'm talking about the Rhodesian movement, but I'm talking also about Palestine. We know that colonialism is one thing, right? One country or power comes into another and they control the means of production, they control the economy, they control and they decapitate the leadership, they control your cultural production, right? The difference between colonialism and settler colonialism is what, y'all? The settlers, right? What does that mean? When you see that, you know that it's about population transfer. So it's not just about the land. The Zionist movement didn't just want our land. They wanted to replace the population of Palestinians with Jewish Europeans. And that's what they went about doing. Does that sound familiar? It should, because it's right here, right? So, and then as Dr. Ponce said, what are you going to do if you can't kill or remove the people? You legally make them less than you. Does that sound familiar? All right. That's apartheid. This is early Zionist propaganda that was sent to Europe. Help him build Palestine. This looks pretty empty to me. What is the logic of elimination? A logic of elimination is an elimination of the people. This comes through confrontation, massacres, execution, war, incarceration, forced removal, reservations or Bantustans, environmental changes. Assimilation, renaming the place, appropriation of culture, right? Israel doesn't have a united culture because they're Jewish people who come from all over the world. But early Europe, a Polish person is different than a German, right? So how are they going to have a united culture? They steal ours. Example, hummus, tabbouleh, falafel, pita bread. That doesn't come from Germany, correct? That comes from our region. So why is it Israeli food? Because it's the process of assimilation. Rejection of Palestinian culture or identity. You can see this today. There's a war on the Palestinian people, but most of the media outlets won't even use the word Palestine. What do they use instead? Arab or Hamas, right? What further evidence do you need? There is ethnic cleansing happening to the T that even when we are being murdered by the tens of thousands, they won't even say our name. Apartheid. What is apartheid? It's an inhumane acts committed for the purposes of establishing and maintaining domination by one racial group of people over any other racial group and systematically oppressing them. So Palestinian people, for example, inside of Jerusalem, if a Palestinian and an Israeli get into a fight and the police are called, the Palestinian goes to a military court. The Israeli goes to a civilian court. Palestinians are tried under Israeli law as combatants from the moment we are born to the moment we die. That means that we don't have the right to what a civilian court entitles us to. The right to a fair trial, the right to a jury from our peers, the right to be innocent until proven guilty, the right to a process in our language that we understand, the right to see evidence against us. The prosecution percentage of Palestinians under Israeli military court is 99.7%. 40% of our men either are incarcerated or will be. Does that sound familiar? All right. This is legal apartheid. And this is the system that we live in. There are 4 regions of Palestine. We have Gaza, we have the 48 territories, or so-called Israel, we have Jerusalem, and we have the West Bank. Depending on where we are born, where we were when the military counted our elders, that gives us a different color of our ID card, and thus we are provided different rights. The foundation of the First Zionist Congress, I'm gonna skip through this because we've been here, we talked about it. Even before Palestine was established as the Israeli state in 1948, Europe was sending hundreds of thousands of Jewish Europeans into Palestine in order to settle it. This is important because this was largely facilitated under the British mandate. And it was in order to go back to this logic of Zionism, which was maximum Jewish Europeans on maximum land and minimum Palestinians on minimum land. David Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister of Israel, this is who the airport is named after. We must expel the Arabs, not the Palestinians, just the Arabs, and take their place, as if we have to use force to guarantee our own right to settle in those places. Then we have force at our disposal. During the assault, we must be ready to strike the decisive blow, that is either to destroy the towns or expel its inhabitants so that our people can replace them. If y'all wanna read more of Zionists in their own words, you can type that into Google, and there's a really good series that US Campaign for Palestinian Rights put on. We know this already, but I wanna be very clear because we're up against a narrative that sometimes is stronger than ours. And that is that anti-Zionism is the same thing as anti-Semitism. Zionism is a European political ideology. Jews are people. All Jewish people are not Zionists. And all Zionists are not Jews. The majority of Zionists in the world are actually evangelical Christians who believe that in order for Jesus to come again, Jewish people must have the majority of Jerusalem. This is found in the book of Matthew, in the body of the giant. If you're interested or anyone reads the Bible, you can take a look. So when we know that Donald Trump, for example, right, he's vehemently pro-Israel. He loves Israel. Donald Trump is an anti-Semite, right? Donald Trump pairs up with Nazis and right-wing conservative fascists. Why do those things go hand in hand? It's because Israel is a fascist conservative state, and they share outlooks on social conditions, right? Racism, infrastructure of occupation and control. So they are politically aligned. Zionism is on behalf of Jewish people. Israel wants to claim legitimacy by claiming that it is the representative of Jewish people. We know that it is not, right? This is Lord Balfour. He's one of the elites in Europe that I was talking about. He talked to Theodore Herzl and he was like, this sounds like a great idea. Ship the Jews out of Europe, that does the problem for us, right? Look at this, 1917, this is before the Holocaust, right? So he writes this letter. Who are these men to give away one piece of land and bequeath it to somebody else? The British, right? They've done it all around the world, and they did it to us. So this is a long piece, but the point I brought out for y'all is His Majesty's government, so the king, view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. So Balfour was like, yeah, we'll give you all the power. You get to have domination and control of the land. But you know those people that are already there? don't persecute them. But we'll leave that up to you. I'm not going to go into this deeply, but just know that the Middle East has a long history of Europeans coming in, shaking hands, and doing the opposite of what they promised us, because we're part of history like everybody else. The Sykes-Picot Agreement is an example of this. I encourage you all to look at it. Sykes-Picot was when the French and the British got together and they said, it's going to be time to carve up the Middle East. Who wants what? And the French were like, ooh, there's this history of crusaders who are our forefathers. They were marauding in the hills of Lebanon, and I can still hear my grandfather calling. This is literally their literature, okay? So they're like, for that reason, we would like Lebanon because we think that's our homeland. And we'll take Syria because it's an economic bastion. The British were like, that's cool. We're going to take Palestine, which has the largest ports in the Mediterranean. And we're also going to take this place that doesn't really have a nation state, but we're going to call it Jordan. And we'll take Iraq. So we'll take 3 provinces and make it the Kingdom of Iraq. Iraq wasn't a country until the 1920s, right? So as the British controlled us, they started to facilitate more Jewish Europeans coming in through the port and applying the first settlement, which is Tel Aviv, right? There's a settlement in the north, okay, where they started to make kibbutz. We'll get back to that. But the first real city that was established was Tel Aviv. And I talk about Tel Aviv as a settlement, and I absolutely have the right to, because I'm from the place that they settled upon. So we know it. I have firsthand stories. Why Tel Aviv? Tel means hill. It's not random, y'all. That's a military strategy. You take a hill over a valley because you can see above it. So they went about occupying the 5 hills. Jaffa was the last hill. We are not victims of history as Palestinian people. We are protagonists in our story. We saw this happen. It wasn't that they're Jewish people. The issue was that we knew that they were being brought in order to determine themselves upon us, right? We didn't know it was the Israeli state, but we smelled something funny. So in 1936, the Palestinian people went through the Great Arab Revolt, and we conditioned the largest boycott in human history. We shut down the entirety of businesses, civil infrastructure, everything for 9 months. We tried to starve the British economically. What else is pressuring the British at this moment? India, right? India is fighting back. So the British are like, wait a minute, these Arabs are really pesky. They're fighting back, right? And how are we going to economically hold on to Palestine, which is so far from us, without the money that we're getting from India and the Silk Road? India, for them, was about money and funding. When India got cut off the balance sheet, what was the factor? What was the first thing they cut? Y'all know it, say it. Palestine. They looked at their budget and they were like, damn, if we lose India, we won't be able to sustain Palestine. You know that Zionist movement? I know we said that stuff before, but we just got to give it to them, right? States talk about money too. Even though they're the world power, they were going to go broke. So this is a bunch of information I had, but what's important to understand is that this was the British configuration, and it defined our lives. The Israelis and their all of the parties that we have today in Israel, they actually have lineages back to the original militia groups. So these are bands of Jewish Europeans who came to Palestine and formed militias, like the Haganah, the Stern, the Lehi. And they later became parties like the Likud party. So the Haganah became Likud, okay? These are some of the policies that created Palestine as it is today. And when I talk about Dalit, this is what I mean, right? They formed three sides and they pushed us. They formed three sides and they pushed us. They formed three sides and they pushed us. That's why Palestinians are where we are today. It's not by chance, it's because it was construed that way. But we didn't just vanish, so where did we go? Because of the Nakba, or the 1948 catastrophe, 50% of the Palestinian people exist outside of historic Palestine. So that's like us, right? The diaspora. 72% of our people exist in refugee camps. So these are now 4 generations of people who, this is a camp. This is how it started. My father was raised in a camp. It starts with tents, and 75 years later, it becomes buildings. Whether or not you have running water and sewage depends on what camp you ended up in. So when you see a Palestinian camp, this is where it started. People getting pushed and waiting to go home, but they were never able to. So we know that this is actually, as though, although it's a defining factor in our history, Nakba Day, or the day that we recognize and have a day of mourning, is the same day as Israel's Independence Day. It's May 15th. So not only is Nakba totally denied in Israeli education and history books, it's actually celebrated. We need to know today that most of the time, young people, right? Most of the time, young people are more progressive than our elders. That's a trend. In the state of Israel, it is the opposite. Young people represent the ultra-right in Israel. The middle right and the right are the older people. So because of the education system and the training, the development from the folks who perpetrated the Nakba, the same folks who developed the education system, they've actually created a more conservative and fascist society than the one that they built. What does that mean about the future? Right? When we talk about a state where Palestinians, Israelis live together, where's the history? Where's the future in that? When we're dealing with old school racism, where we have smaller brains because we're not quite human. You know, that old school racism, that's what's taught in the history books, in school. What does that mean for us, right? And future. And I know I'm throwing a lot of information, but I really encourage y'all, for whatever is interesting to you, pick it out and read it, because there's a lot. And it's the unlearning. So dive into it. If you want to look up educational systems inside Israel and textbooks, look up Badil. They do a study on this, right? It's also about denial. This is the village of Saforiye. This is the largest national park in the north of Israel, and it's on top of a town. Are there folks who are Christian in here? Cool. Saforiye is the village where Mary's mom was born. Her name was Hannah. She was a Palestinian from the village of Saforiye. This is literally where Jesus's grandmother is born. That's what it means to have a religion that wasn't brought upon us. It's from us, right? And it's now a national park. Israel went through a process of degreening. For y'all who are interested in environmental justice in particular, there's the re-greening process, right? Make the desert bloom. They planted pine trees on top of our villages so that we couldn't return. How am I doing on time, y'all? Good? Okay. For the interest of time, I hope this is okay. This is a survivor's testimony from the Deir Yassin massacre. So one of the ways that Israel was allowed to or able to push us from the land was through psychological warfare. The Deir Yassin massacre is not the largest massacre, but it's one of the most well-known because it was particularly brutal. Pregnant women had their children literally split from their stomachs with knives. There was mass rape and murder. When stories were told and when news spread from the village of Deir Yassin into the other villages, people fled before the Israelis got there because they were scared that it would happen to their family. I want to point out something really important. Deir Yassin had made a peace treaty in 1947 with the Jewish settlement next to them. They said, we won't touch you and y'all don't touch us. Just like here, no treaty that we ever created with the Israelis was honored, not a single one. Deir Yassin is a memory of that. And we know this because also, we know this, I'm sorry, this is gonna be brutal, y'all. This is the village of Tantura, and it's a trigger for y'all, I apologize. I wanted to put some videos of the difference between our Nakba survivors' stories, literally all of us who come from that, and the soldiers, right? It is perfectly fine, because y'all have seen this on the news, right? It's perfectly fine to brag about war crimes against Palestinians. And until this moment and the ICJ, it has not been prosecuted. There are multiple examples of this. The village of Tantura. This is a well-known massacre. You want to look up Zionists in their own terms? There are multiple soldiers who brag about their gains and what happened, right? A lot of this is about psychological torture. And we see that today in Gaza, right? Have y'all heard about the story of Hind Raheb, the girl who was stuck in the vehicle with her family, right? Psychological torture and defeat is an Israeli policy. It's not just about killing you, it's about killing your psyche. Hind Raheb is a 6-year-old. Her parents tried to take her to freedom out of the area where she was. They put her in a car with her extended relatives. Her relatives were killed in the car by Israeli snipers. She sat in the car with the bodies of her loved ones for 24 hours until the Israelis gave the Red Cross permission to save her. We just found out yesterday that the paramedics who tried to save Hind Raheb were sniped in front of her face, and then she was killed. Why would the Israeli military do that as a policy to a 6-year-old? Because it's about the psychology, right? The psychology of defeat. What is the price for fighting back? What's the price? That's what they want to make us ask. From Deir Yassin to now, in February 2024, that's the policy that we're up against. I know that this is really somber. I'm telling it to y'all straight because we're in the middle of a genocide and I don't have time to mince words with you. I also respect y'all's intelligence enough. You know what I'm talking about. If there's anything I'm saying, you're like, that doesn't sound right, go to the internet, right? Use the process of good information. You can see it, you know it. We need to say these things out loud because that's how we're gonna make this stop, is being able to name it. This is Zionism in action from 1948 to now. So this is one of the most popular Israeli beaches. This is where the massacre of Tantura happened. So also, this is a massacre site for us. It's a major tourist spot. What we know now, and I'm gonna try to really roll through this. Are y'all okay? Are you here? All right. What I'm gonna try to do for the sake of being able to also have lots of questions and get to the present moment is I wanted to give you the foundations. From 1948 to 1978, this is extremely important. For us, this is a period where Palestinians are not able to leave our areas without permission, right? Israelis are moving freely, but we have to have permits in order to leave the door of the village. And if you're outside, right, you can be punished. We have something called Land Day. Land Day is coming up at the end of April. Land Day marks when Palestinians inside of 48 revolted against martial law policies, and they were lynched in the field. We commemorate Land Day every day in order to talk about and to honor our martyrs, the people who have given for their struggle, even when they didn't mean to, right? The people who have given their lives so that we can be here. Every March in April, there are these little red poppies. Have y'all seen them? Maybe in like Palestinian drawing, stuff like that. So the poppies are called the Hanoun. The Hanoun comes out of the land, and that's on Mother's Day. So we say that that's the sons and daughters visiting their parents, because that's how many people we have lost. And we connect it back to Land Day. So the Nakba is not just an event, right? It's an ongoing process. Catastrophe and dispossession are ongoing for us as Palestinians. We call this period the Naksa, or the setback. So it wasn't just one and done, 800,000 Palestinians pushed out, right? And killed, and 15,000 killed. We have nearly 400,000 Palestinians that were added to the thousands of refugees displaced in 1948 because Israel went through a modernization program. We're figments of the past. Y'all already know. We're not supposed to be here, and we're definitely not supposed to be in the future. So when Israel talks about urban modernization, if y'all look at that policy here, you can look at Chinatown, right? Look at the Black and brown communities outside of Hayward, right? Which was the jazz capital of the West Coast, Rossmore. We don't know about that history or that community because of things like urban modernization. That's a local policy y'all can look at. Actually, y'all know Pancho Villa? Y'all know who that is? His grandson was one of the last people who led the resistance at Rossmore in Hayward. True story. His name was Nava. You can look him up. So we're not part of the modern, and therefore our towns, the remaining places, are destroyed in order to be built for modern urban areas for more Israelis, for more settlers. This is Dome of the Rock. Basically, the remaining territories, again, we're not victims of history, right? This happened, there's always a response. We don't just take this, right? There's a history of Palestinians fighting back. So in 1967, there was an attempt by Palestinian forces, also by Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria, and Egypt, in order to push back against Zionism. Israel is being backed by the United States, Britain, and France, the same actors, right? So in terms of weaponry, Israel today has a qualitative military edge. That means that Israel has the second best weapons to the United States. That means that we've traded many weapons with Saudi Arabia, but they can never have a better qualitative military edge than the state of Israel, because Israel is the United States' preference in the region. Zionist history narrative will tell you that they beat Syria, Lebanon, Egypt because they were stronger. What I'm here to tell y'all is that they beat these countries who are trying to stop an incursion into 67, so into West Bank and into Gaza, because their weaponry was far superior, because they're funded by the #1 world superpower. Also, specifically in this case, when we get into Yom Kippur, the United States sold the Egyptian Air Force a bunch of planes, and they hacked their computers, which is why the Egyptian Air Force never even got off the ground. The guns that the Jordanians were carrying shot backwards. There were more Jordanians who were killed from indirect fire than actual fight. It's not random. This is part of a series of policies and trade, right? The best example I would use for this, for things that we might maybe be more familiar with, are the incursions in Latin America, right? Look at Guatemala, look at Nicaragua, look at El Salvador, right? Look at Panama. The same policies were utilized in every single one of those cases. And I want to tell y'all also that El Salvador, Guatemala, the massacre that happened under Rio Mats in 1971, this same period, would not have been possible without Israeli military personnel on the ground in Guatemala. When Rio Mats was tried for war crimes against his people, he said, I want to give a shout out to the 300 Israeli military personnel and advisors who made the massacre possible. Because they utilized the policies. The Israelis said, oh, we learned something very important in 1948, and we want to teach you. This is not conspiracy theory, shadowy rooms. We know the people, we know the time, and we know the policies. This is written, this is recorded. It's up to us to make sure that we know this. When we talk about organizing, joint struggle, right? Fighting together against a united oppressor, we have names for the policies. Scorched earth policy, done in El Salvador. That was an Israeli policy. The Israelis learned it from who? The British and the US Cavalry here. Scorched earth policy was utilized against the Navajo or the Diné people. That's where they took the protocol. There are many things that connect us, but one of them is the plight under oppressors, right? Okay. Oh, and here we are, economic superpower with repressive reaches into Central and Latin America, East Asia, and East Africa. Everywhere there's been a dictator, check out who's been behind it. The US very often, and Israel often right behind it. Okay. We've come pretty far, so this is where this is at. 67 is important because this is when the West Bank and Gaza are put under Israeli control. 1973, Egypt is forced to sign a peace deal with Israel. Israel receives the #1 largest US military package in the world. The second is Egypt. Why, y'all? Why? Because it's their neighbor. Egypt receives that money in order to secure Israel in the region. Point blank, that's it. We have 1987 to 1993. We're going to get into First Intifada, Second Intifada, and Saif al-Quds. Okay. I'm going to stop. I'm going to pause this and we're going to come back, okay? So this is when I'm talking about the setbacks happen, right? Gaza and Jerusalem and West Bank are taken up under Israeli control. Israel also takes a piece of the Golan Heights, which is part of Syria. In order for them, Egypt, to get Sinai back, they have to sign a peace deal. Domination in early years of settler colonialism, sure, it's through force. But the primary mode of domination that we live in today is what? It's economics, right? If you don't follow our policies, we're going to starve you, right? If you don't follow our policies, we're going to curb your trade. And then we're going to blame it on you because you're Black and you're brown. And what business do you have leading anything? But really, it's the United States, or it's Israel in this case, in the back end controlling the economic flow. Food is food. It's either there or it's not, right? Somalia, no water, no food. That's not an environmental disaster. That's a man-made disaster. That happens through policy, right? So I'm gonna skip through that. I apologize, y'all. I want to make sure we get to the next piece. How am I doing on time? Good. 10 minutes? Okay. So the intifadas are important because I really want y'all to understand our history in our terms. When we go through, have y'all heard of like two-state solution? Two-state solution is pie in the sky. Two-state solution is that Palestinians get Gaza and the West Bank and Israel exists in the middle. 13% of Palestine is still lived upon by Palestinian people. Where are you going to put the state? In the sky? Two-state solution was never a solution, and it's dead if it was, right? So when Biden's talking about a two-state, we have to really think about what does that mean and where does that come from? We can talk about it in the questions if you're interested, right? So we know that the first Intifada, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, was formed in order to represent the Palestinian people, no matter where we were in the world. Palestinian Liberation Organization is being chased around the Middle East. Their headquarters are in Tunisia. They're bombed and displaced. They moved to Jordan. Jordan, bombed and displaced. They're moved to Lebanon, right? 1982, you have the Sabra and Shatila massacre that the United States helped to engineer, right? In the 90s, the Palestinian Liberation Organization said, okay, you know what, y'all? We don't have any other choice. The primary front of struggle has to be Palestine. We've tried to do this from outside. We have to do it from inside. And so I'm going to name something, and we can talk about it later. Y'all have heard about hostage exchanges, correct? Why would Hamas take up a strategy to capture Israelis? To get the people back, to empty the prisons, right? That was the primary demand. In 1983, 6 Israeli hostages were taken by members of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. They were traded for 4,000 Palestinian prisoners. Who are the people in prisons? They are our leadership. They are the most committed organizers. They are the people who, against all odds, martial law, apartheid, settler colonial violence, right, and a kangaroo court, have resisted in order to make our life better, right? They're teachers, they're doctors, they're cultural workers, they're folks, they're farmers, right? They're people who have been active. They're members of political parties. So in 1983, those people are released, 4,000 of our people. The jails are emptied. In 2 years, those leadership constructed the ability for us as Palestinian people to be sovereign and self-sustainable, right? Israel controls the food. If we rise up against the Israelis in a civil uprising, how are we going to be able to feed our people? Those folks were released, and in 2 years, they constructed a society where we would be able to do that. When y'all look at the first Intifada, 1985, that was because our prisoners were released and they were able to construct that society. 1985 is called the Intifada of Stones. It's also known as a non-violent uprising, right? Because people rose up and they created amazing campaigns. If y'all want to watch a video or, a film on the first Intifada, you can watch Naila, 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 and the uprisings. Or there's another film called The Wanted 18. It's about Beit Jala. They bought 18 dairy cows. We don't have milk like that in our region. They come from goats. And they started a dairy production. Israel put the cows on a national security list. That's real talk, because they were feeding the people, right? They knew that as long as the people were fed, we would wait. We would sit them out. It's called The Wanted 18. It's on Netflix. Okay, so what we know is that leading up to this Intifada, you have mass repression, right? De-development of our economy, meaning that they're relying on us. You know those settlements inside of Israel? They're built by Palestinians because people have to feed their families. How undignified is that? That's the trap that we're in, right? People don't want to live that way. You have more and more settlers that are being moved. We're denied civil and political rights. You have the creation of the First Intifada, and you have the engagement across multiple fronts. This is Palestinian civil society. When we talk about Hamas, y'all gotta understand the context that they're in. We're American. We have what, 2 political parties? And we have the audacity to lecture Palestinians? We have over 9. And they have concensorship. You have to engage with them on a regular basis, right? Food, education, agriculture. When's the last time y'all saw the Democratic Party in your everyday life? Right? We have a superiority complex, but we don't know anything about thriving and multiplicity in political life. Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine is a communist Marxist organization. Hamas is a political Islamist organization. And they've had to organize together because they represent different parts of society, right? I'm telling y'all this because I could do a whole other presentation about Palestinian political life. But what's important to know is that every single party in Palestine is on the terror list, including the one that the United States funds. Y'all heard me? Including the one that the United States funds. So they have criminalized political participation in any sector. This is an image from the First Intifada. This is a woman from outside of Bethlehem throwing stones at tanks. She just got off of work. Angela Davis once gave a lecture that I had the honor of being at, and she talked about how in the South, they would throw stones during Jim Crow. So that was a story I'd never heard, and it was about civil disobedience. We're really quick to call something like this violence, but we're real slow to talk about the policies that people are up against, right? Everything I've described is violence. So Palestinians boycott Israeli products. We refuse to pay our taxes, organize ourselves into popular committees to act as alternatives to the civil administration, right? We have different images. So this is from 2021. This is from the this is from the second Intifada, right? This is from the last 10 years. This is from 2017, and this is from 1985. There's a long history of Palestinians fighting back against disproportionate violence. We don't have tanks like this. We don't have the infrastructure of occupation. They do. We don't have the Uzis and the guns and the drones. They do. Everything that you see Palestinians fighting back with in Gaza, you know, the drones or the double missiles, that's all Israeli technology that has been re-engineered. That's literally US-made weapons, and that's why they're so upset. Because they've tried to starve every aspect of us being able to fight back, and it's at having the least, right? Rafifa Ziadeh says Palestinians can float in 1 inch of water. We are a people who can float in 1 inch of water. It's trying to make the impossible possible, right? And there's a cost. So I won't go into this because I want us to go quickly. If y'all will humor me, I really want to focus on the Oslo Accords, okay? Because they define what it means for me and the Palestinians in this room to be Palestinian here in the United States. Oslo was an agreement because the First Intifada was very successful. Palestinians across civil society rose up against the Israelis, and it hurt their pockets. There was a coalition called the Madrid Conference, okay? Different folks from popular committees were organizing together in order to go into negotiations. They were saying, there's the question of guerrilla warfare, and they're saying, we're down to go into peace negotiations, but only if we have power, only if you promise, or if there's a method where we actually can sustain our freedom. We don't want to live as second-class people or third-class people underneath you. What does the US do historically in situations like this? With Israel, right? They were like, whoa, we can't let that happen. How are we going to push forward negotiations that are not accountable to the people? Who can we choose somebody who looks like them, who is from them, but who will organize the Israeli occupation on our behalf, right? So Bill Clinton orchestrated something called the Oslo Accords along with the Israelis. I'm not going to go into Arafat because he's a much longer history, right? They enter into it and it undercuts the grassroots negotiations that were rising and going to Madrid. And they said, no, we're going to hold this in Oslo. The Oslo Accords at the end promised we're going to put something called the Palestinian Authority into place in order to bureaucratize colonization, right? So we're going to manage Israeli occupation for you. And we're also going to say that Palestinians in Lebanon and Egypt and Syria, y'all are an internal problem. We're so sorry. We can't help you anymore. Our hands are off. That's just 50% of the Palestinian people. They said, Palestinians in the US, y'all just got to become American. That melting pot thing, get into it. Palestinians in Canada, you're Canadian. Palestinians inside of Israel, y'all are an Israeli, internal Israeli problem. Who do we represent? We represent the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank. That's it. So 75% of our people, sorry. On top of that, we will continue and we will uphold the geographic fragmentation of our people. That's literally the separation of our people from one to the other, right? From one place to the other. We will enforce the political fragmentation. We will enforce the economic fragmentation. You're not a people. You will vanish. This is the logic of elimination again. Which is why we as Palestinian Youth Movement were formed. We were formed and we formed ourselves in response to Oslo. We were like, wait a minute. The right and the demand for a free Palestine doesn't just die because the United States and Israel once again said it so. We as Palestinians have rights. And they're not just the rights, they're not just the humanitarian rights. When we see what's happening in Gaza, right, the genocide, the issue isn't just that they don't have clean water, they don't have food, right? If the people of Gaza, which they do not, had food, they had water, and they had medicine, would they be free? No, that's because they have political rights. We as Palestinian people have rights. They were determined for us. Me as an individual, I can't sell them. I can't barter them. I can't give them away. They are the right to self-determination, the right to a Palestine from the river to the sea, the right to freedom for all of our political prisoners, and the right of return, the right for us to return to our homeland. Those are the rights. Whether or not they say it's so, that's what we are demanding. Right now in this moment upon genocide, we are demanding water and food and humanitarian aid and a ceasefire because there is no number of trucks that's going to enter Gaza that can undo what one night of Israeli bombing can do. Right? It's practical. It's nuts and bolts. Genocide's not a metaphor. You live or you die. We want our people to live. But if they get freedom of movement inside Gaza, they're not free. Humanitarian rights doesn't equal freedom. This is political freedom. They have the right to go home. They have the right to be equal. They have the right to self-determination like every other human being on this planet. That's what we're fighting for. And that's why we push back against Oslo. I'm not Palestinian American. I'm a Palestinian who's born and raised here. The Bay raised me and I'm proud of that. But I'm a Palestinian. And I belong to a national liberation struggle. And that struggle is fighting for the self-determination and the rights of my people, no matter where we are. How do we do that? We choose solidarity with other people who are up against the same things that we are. I'm not gonna be like, ooh, that's real rough that that's happening to you right now, right? Deportations in the US, rough. I'm gonna wait till I get mine and then I'll come back for you. That's not how that works, right? We chose and we choose solidarity. If they're after you, they're after us. If they're after us, they're after you. What does that mean to stand up and fight back as a united front? right? And to understand that this is a mechanism and it's here in order to repress us. It's the same policies. How do we fight back? With principles of dignity. I want to say something also about future quickly. And this is all of this stuff that I have about current conditions. I want to say something about future. For us as Palestinian people, the question is not around hatred against Israeli people because they are Jewish. We do not care what the stated religion of the people who are occupying and maiming us is. The resolve is not because they are Jewish. It is because they are settlers. It is because they are colonizers. The way forward is for us to decide. It's not for the US to decide. It's for the Palestinian people to decide what is our future. And I can guarantee you that there are multiple currents and ideas. But if we look at history, anti-Semitism and that problem, that violence is European made and European bred. We as the Palestinian people have a history, we have demands, and we're actually committed to equality and justice for all people. I can guarantee you that we will not be the same oppressors as the ones who are on top of us now, nor have we ever been historically. Find me history where we have been that. We have not. The Israelis to this day will continue to accuse us for the crimes that they perpetuate against us, okay? We are here. There are multiple demands. And so when we talk about freedom, we can get into it. What are the different tenets? What are the different demands? But the main thing that we're focused on is a long-term liberation and return. I can promise y'all, 30,000 people, what the sacrifice is and the cost of freedom, we're not gonna get wrapped up in revenge. But I can also promise y'all that if Rafah is invaded on the ground today, we will witness a complete genocide. What does that mean for us in 2024 to have to make difficult choices in the present? We don't get the benefit of saying, oh yeah, racism, right? The civil rights movement. I know where I would have been. This is a moment now. Where are you? Where are we? When you have to answer to history, what did you do to try and stop this? That's where organizing comes in. That's why I'm an organizer, because I believe that we can make a difference. And I believe that we have that power, and it's people power. We don't have to get romantic about it. We know where the power structures are, right? We know how much more powerful they are than us. But there's many, many more of us than there is them. And the first step is knowing the information and being able to wield that for ourselves, for our liberation. So inshallah, may we see a free Palestine and freedom for every single one of our people.
Thank you so much. It's an amazing presentation. And I think where we left off is the question you're going to ask yourself leaving this room. When we study history as students, we look back like we should have done something. I would have done something. It's now. So that's where we end, and that's where we start. Keep the conversations going. I know if people got to go to class to your next session, but if anybody wants to hang out, come on up and talk to us. We'll be here. But let's give another round of applause tonight.